Emma loved old cameras. Their worn leather and the anticipation of a developing photo held a certain magic. She often spent her weekends scouring thrift stores, hoping to find a hidden gem among the dusty shelves. Each camera she found had a story, a history that she felt connected to. So when she saw the Polaroid in the dimly lit corner of the thrift store, her heart skipped a beat. It was as if the camera was calling out to her, begging to be taken home. It was a beauty, vintage with silver accents gleaming under a layer of dust. The craftsmanship was exquisite, and she could tell it had been well loved in its prime. She picked it up, its coldness sending a shiver down her spine. It felt almost alive in her hands, as if it had a soul of its own. The store owner, a frail old man, appeared beside her, his eyes filled with a strange knowing. He seemed to materialize out of nowhere, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "That camera," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "It's cursed. Stay away from it." Emma chuckled, dismissing his words as the ramblings of an old man. She had heard similar warnings before, and they always added a bit of thrill to her finds. She had a weakness for vintage finds, and brushing off their quirks was part of the fun. Each item she collected had its own unique charm, and she loved the mystery that came with them. "Don't you worry," she said, her fingers tracing the camera's contours. "I've got a shelf full of cursed antiques at home." Her collection was her pride and joy, each piece a testament to her passion. She winked, her tone light and teasing. She enjoyed the playful banter that often accompanied her thrift store adventures. The old man simply shook his head, his gaze fixed on the Polaroid in her hand. His expression was one of deep concern, as if he knew something she didn't. "It ain't no ordinary curse, girl. This one steals souls." His voice was grave, and for a moment, Emma felt a chill run down her spine, but she quickly brushed it off, eager to add the Polaroid to her collection. Emma shrugged off the old man's warning as she left the store, the Polaroid safely tucked in her bag. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that seemed to dance around her. She hurried home, eager to test her new treasure. Back in her dorm room, she unpacked the Polaroid. It felt colder than it should have, the metal almost biting into her skin. She loaded it with film, her hands trembling with anticipation. Her roommate Sarah walked in, her eyes widening at the sight of the camera. "Whoa, that's so cool!" Sarah exclaimed, reaching out to touch it. Emma pulled it back slightly. "Careful, it's old." She wasn't sure why, but she didn't want Sarah touching it just yet. There was something about the camera, a strange energy that made her uneasy. "Come on, let's take a picture," Sarah pleaded, her initial hesitation forgotten. Emma hesitated for a moment, then agreed. They decided to take a photo by the window, the fading light perfect for a vintage aesthetic. Emma aimed the camera at Sarah, her finger hovering over the shutter button. "Say cheese!" The camera flashed, a blinding light filling the room. The photo slid out, blank at first, then slowly developing. As the image sharpened, Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Sarah's smile was gone, replaced with a look of pure terror. Her eyes were wide, vacant, as if something had stolen her soul. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, oblivious to the horror staring back from the photo. "Let me see." Emma quickly hid the picture, her mind racing. "It's nothing, just a bad photo," she stammered, her voice trembling. "The lighting was off." Sarah shrugged, not noticing Emma's unease. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The photo, the look on Sarah's face, it was all too real to be a trick of the light. Section 5. The darkness spreads. The next few days were a blur of unsettling events. Strange noises echoed through the halls at night, shadows seemed to move on their own, and an eerie chill settled over the house. Sarah had become withdrawn, her usual cheer replaced by a haunting silence. She would sit for hours, staring into nothingness, as if lost in a world only she could see. She barely spoke, her eyes distant and vacant. It was as if the light within her had been extinguished, leaving behind a hollow shell. And Emma, well, she couldn't shake the feeling that the camera was to blame. Every time she looked at it, A sense of dread washed over her, as if the camera itself was watching her. One evening, as Sarah slept, Emma snuck out with the Polaroid. She had to know the truth, to understand if this object was the source of their torment. She needed to understand, to know if the camera was truly the cause of this unsettling change in her friend. Her determination was fueled by a mix of fear and desperation. She found herself drawn to a quiet corner of the campus, the old oak tree, their usual spot for late-night talks. The tree now seemed to loom larger, its branches casting menacing shadows. Aiming the camera at the tree, she pressed the shutter button. The flash, the developing image, the horror. Her hands trembled as she watched the photo slowly come to life. The once majestic oak was now a gnarled, skeletal thing in the photo. Its transformation was both shocking and terrifying. Its branches seemed to reach out like grasping claws, its trunk a twisted grimace. The tree looked as if it was alive, writhing in agony. The leaves, once vibrant green, were now decayed and withered. They hung limply, as if drained of all life. It was as if the camera had captured the tree's soul and twisted it into something grotesque. Emma's heart pounded as she realized the true power of the Polaroid. Fear clawed at Emma's throat. The old man's words echoed in her mind. "This one steals souls." She looked from the photo to the camera in her hand, her blood turning to ice. It was true. She had seen it. The life drained from Sarah's eyes, the oak tree transformed into a skeletal husk. The camera was stealing souls, trapping them within its haunted lens. She raced back to her dorm, the camera a dead weight in her hand. She had to help Sarah, had to break the curse before it consumed her friend completely. But how do you fight a curse, a malevolent entity trapped within a vintage Polaroid? Desperation gnawed at Emma. She tried to destroy the camera, smashing it against the wall, throwing it in the garbage. But every morning it reappeared on her bedside table, colder and heavier than before. Her attempts to convince Sarah about the camera proved futile. Sarah, her eyes vacant and distant, simply dismissed her concerns as stress. "You're being paranoid, Em," Sarah had said, her voice a hollow whisper. "It's just a camera." But Emma knew the truth. She could see it in the way Sarah moved, like a puppet with severed strings. The camera had taken hold, its grip tightening with every passing day. Emma found herself standing in front of the mirror, the Polaroid in her hand. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls, creating an eerie atmosphere. She could feel the weight of the camera, not just in her hand, but in her soul. Her reflection stared back at her, a stranger with haunted eyes and a hollow smile. It was as if the mirror held a different version of her, one that had seen too much, endured too much. The camera felt warm now, pulsating with a sinister energy. It was no longer just an object. It was alive, breathing, and it seemed to be waiting for something. It hummed against her skin, urging her, tempting her. The sensation was almost hypnotic, drawing her deeper into its dark allure. A single thought echoed in her mind, clear and terrifying. What if this was her only chance? What if this was the only way to end the nightmare? What if she could capture the curse? The idea seemed absurd, yet it was the only glimmer of hope she had left. What if, by taking a photo of herself, she could trap the entity within the camera, freeing Sarah and ending its reign of terror? The thought gave her a sense of purpose, a mission. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But desperation had a way of making the impossible seem possible. But as she stared into the eyes of her reflection, she knew she had no other choice. The determination in her eyes was unmistakable. She raised the camera, her finger trembling on the shutter button. Every fiber of her being screamed in fear, but she pushed through it. The lens seemed to pulse, drawing her in, promising a terrifying truth. Click. The sound echoed in the room, sealing her fate. The flash blinded her. The photo slid out, developing slowly, agonizingly. As the image sharpened, a scream caught in her throat. It wasn't her staring back from the photo. It was a grotesque caricature, her features twisted into a mask of horror. Her eyes, wide and vacant, stared back, devoid of life, reflecting the same terrifying emptiness that haunted Sarah. The camera clattered to the floor, its work complete. Emma reached for the photo, her fingers tracing the distorted image of her lost soul. She was trapped. The camera had claimed her, just like the old man warned. A cold, empty laughter echoed around the room, but Emma was beyond fear. She was lost, another soul claimed by the haunted Polaroid, her essence forever imprisoned within its cursed frame.